So we
ready
just need to have a
to-
tank to tell us when we can log in.
7.3.
Get ready. Well, hold on. It's not yet.
Go now.
Go, go, go,
Go.
go, go!
Yeah, now.
User
Start
disconnected
reloading
from
you.
your channel.
What's that, Mikkel?
It's done now. It's done now.
I
No,
can't get in
we've
again.
disconnected, so.
You savage us.
Savage is full roleplay.
Savage, are you okay, man?
Savage just pulls the plug out of the wall.
I'm going. I'm dead.
Alex, I've
alive,
just
or-
tested.
I mean, I'm in.
Disconnecting TeamSpeak doesn't kill the boss.
Sorry guys for the power out.
We all
How did
dead,
we all
but we're in.
die?
Oh,
I crash again. I crash again.
I crash again.
Ladies and gentlemen, 8.3 brings with it a brand new raid, and here we are on the raid testing on the PTR. We are inside Ny'alotha, the Waking City. Not much to show you here, unfortunately. A wonderful little loading hub, I assume, which will be the entrance as we get in there. In the void, we're floating on these strange sort of pyramids. But then down into the actual boss, we only got to test one boss today of what will be a 12-boss raid, which was Shad'har the Insatiable. So not much to investigate because there was a lot of really obnoxious trash in here that exploded and did all kinds of horrible things. And in fact, they portaled us into the trash at the start, so it instantly killed plenty of people. It was quite an odd decision to do that, but we did manage to get in and actually kill this boss. This was a one-shottable boss. Not much going on with it here. Not a great opening, I'll be honest. It doesn't set it up well, but we do know we are going into a city. So I'm going to put Shad'har, which is like the mid-level boss, like boss 6, boss 5, boss 7. It's going to be in the middle somewhere, as not really the meat and veg. So I wouldn't judge too much about the aesthetic and the scenario and the setting based on this. Think of this more like Blackwater Behemoth. It's a very sort of different setup than what you'd find in the rest of the dungeon. That's what it feels like to me, but of course we'll get more confirmation on that the further and deeper we get into Ny'alotha. So what is this boss? This is your patchwork. This is your butcher. That's what this boss is. It's the DPS check of the raid. So they're obviously testing out what people were doing, new essences. More than the boss itself, I would say. They were testing exactly what players can put out. They did buff our neck level, but they gave us no neck forge, so we couldn't actually utilize anything. We couldn't unlock the slots, so it was semi-useless to do that. Although they have provided us with the legendary cloaks, which are currently bugged in terms of what item level they have. It's suspected they'll go up to like 470, if not higher. And if they do, that doesn't actually make them that good, because a gem slide cloak would actually make them better. So keeping my eye on what they're doing with the legendary cloaks, although they do seem required for the final boss, which is a little irritating because they're not that good. They're just raw stats, and some of the stats are pretty useless for some classes. On top of that, they also scaled us and messed around with us and all that kind of stuff. But basically, we're similar to what we would have on live, although we did have the new essences, which we did try out, some new healing essences, and the new essence that actually buffs your party, not your raid. It buffs your party's Azerite damage. So if you have an Azerite piece, an Azerite essence that actually deals damage, like Condensed Life Force, you can have someone else in your party with a different essence that buffs the damage of that one. As this boss is an aberration, that means you can use things like Purifying Protocol, things like that, and have somebody else buff it, then you can do massive damage with it. So all kinds of cool things you could maybe do with that in terms of DPS. When it comes to boss mechanics then, as I said, it's a patchwork butcher style fight. Really not much to show you. The first and most interesting thing that you can see about this fight is just how goddamn small he is, which I don't mind. Not every boss has to be giant, and we do know that Ny'alotha, which is the final boss, will be huge. Shad'har is actually very, very small, certainly in comparison to its counterparts like Guam, which are considerably larger. This is a very small little doggo in a very small little room, and that is intentional. The enrage to this isn't just like a hard enrage that the boss will just suddenly do at a certain timer. It's actually based on the room. So let me just take you through these mechanics really quickly. There's not much to tell you here. It's a very, very simplistic fight. It's got 3 phases. It starts in the fire phase, which means it does a fire breath. Don't stand in it. And it's also going to spawn these little adds that fixate someone. You get a big arrow over your head, and they will hit you, but the further away you are from other people when it hits you, the less AoE damage you'll do to them. Really quite simple. Move away. On Mythic, this will root you when you get targeted, so some positional requirements will be required on Mythic. This is the heroic version of the fight. But other than that, just move away from other players and let it hit you. Once it reaches 66%, and of course I can now explain that bizarre intro that you saw, for the first 30 minutes of the 1 hour raid test, whatever the problem was, once this fight entered phase 2, which is at 66%, something it was spawning, some texture it was using was missing in the game files, and actually just instantly disconnected everybody. So we were making a plan there where at 67%, the entire raid, besides the tanks, would alt F4. We would throw cooldowns and all the hots and everything in the world on top of the tanks to keep them alive while we were offline. Then we would try and log back in after the sort of crash moment. It almost worked. It almost worked until the texture was tried to be used again, and then it crashed us a second time. But it was a good plan. Something to try and bypass the disconnection boss that was plaguing us during this encounter. Thankfully, after about half an hour or so, they did fix the boss so we could test the entire thing. So the second phase you're going to get that was crashing us was actually the shadow phase, the void phase. So as you can imagine, purple. Lots and lots of purple going on in here. No surprises there. Which just basically does a shadow breath now. These breaths don't seem to one-shot. They basically disorientate and CC you for an exceptionally long time. So for a boss that requires a huge DPS check, that's a bit of a problem. So you don't want to get hit by it. The additional element to this fight at this point is actually void spheres, very similar to the arcane orbs that you've seen on Shad'har, except they're purple now, and they need soaking by players. Do a very nasty dot. Very, very nasty dot. That's all they're really going to do too. The final phase is where it's actually going to come down to the DPS check. So although this fight is a DPS check, it's based on the phase that the fight is in, so you can manipulate that in some ways in terms of trying to get the perfect transition when all cooldowns are ready. You can do some messing around before you hit the final green toxic phase. In the final phase, you will just drop a patch in the middle of the room and it will just spread, and eventually it will fill the whole room, and if that happens, you're dead. It's really quite that simple, and he's going to continue to do his green breath, going to do obnoxious amounts of damage. Raid damage is going to be picked up at that point. It's going to be big. He's still going to be fixated by things. All this kind of stuff is going to be happening. But basically, you'll no longer have to soak the orbs, but you will just have to burn the boss down. As simple as that. The boss gets more and more stacking damage in this phase in the terms of frenzy. If he should walk into the water, because you'll notice a little platform that enters the room. So Blizzard probably going to keep their eye on that for people trying to manipulate the boss to be trying to get across the water. It gives it like a buff to try and stop that happening. Yet there's definitely some work to be done there just to make sure. It's one of those fights, what I'm trying to skirt around here, it's one of those fights that doesn't just kill you when it hits the enrage. It's another fight similar to other fights we've seen in the past, like similar to the Butcher as well, where in fact it will go into its I'm killing you phase, yet you do have some time after that point, if your players are a bit clever, in order to buy some extra time, even if it might be 10 or 15 seconds of the boss running around killing everybody, where you can still be pumping damage into it. If you're a little bit on the wise side, you can do that, which means we're probably going to see, certainly on Mythic, fights that work like that, similar to what we saw with like the World First Queen's Court, is that the bosses will be in rage, yet the players will be doing everything possible to stop it hitting people for as long as humanly possible and get it killed. So it looks like it's going to be one of those fights, which can be quite fun. Overall, of course, if you're into mechanics, at least at the heroic level, this fight is going to be pretty uninteresting. You're going to be pretty bored on this one. It's not quite Blackwater Behemoth boring. There is still stuff to be doing, but essentially this is just a target dummy with a little bit of movement, at least at the heroic level. We have to wait and see what the Mythic level's like. It could be extremely tight. It could really require some heavy min-maxing, which Mythic Raiders tend to like. So if that's the case, it could be enjoyable. And then, of course, you have the fun in later weeks as your gear gets better, as where you're crushing this boss into the ground. I will make a note here as we kind of close out on this one, is that benthic gear, remember, does not work in Ny'alotha. It works in the Eternal Palace, and if you are preparing for the next raid, it's something you want to consider is having pieces that aren't benthic. If the stats on benthic, because they remain, but it's the affixes that disappear, is picking up high level gear. So you might have been disenchanting some 450 items because you had benthic and it was just better. Remember, with the new raid coming, that's not going to be the case. They're just going to be flat stats, although they will be gem slotted pieces. So that's also something to bear in mind, is to start picking up that other gear, because we do have DPS checks in there, such as Shad'har. So that's Shad'har for you for now. I wouldn't read too much into this. I know some people will probably expecting, as I generally am, is that the first boss they show us in a new raid is going to blow you away. That's not the case. It's not going to blow you away, this one, certainly at heroic. So wait and see. Watch this space. I am not downtrodden, for sure. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.